in this episode, we welcome Chris and Ken, who share with us how they prepare and play games for solo players. And I rejoice at being back on the air. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 44, Solo Games, and I'm glad to be back. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host, Inwils, and welcome to April. Okay, did you miss me? Yes, we have had a bit of a break, but I'm pleased to say that we are back to the regular episodes. Yes, Mythras Matters will be back being published the first of every month. So make sure you tune in to your favorite podcast services to find us. When I'm actually organizing, recording and editing the podcast episode after episode, I sometimes forget how much I enjoy creating it. It's been a couple of months when I've not done anything for the Mythras Matters podcast, and I have to say I've missed it more than I thought I would. While I was away from the podcast, I actually decided to reorganize my other content relating to Mythras and role-playing games. And I took them down from YouTube and decided which ones would go back up. And after I took them down, I was quite overwhelmed about what happened. When you are making content week after week, you often don't have time to stop and look up from your video editor. And as you are creating, you can sometimes lose where you are placed within a community. At this point, I have to say a huge thank you to so many people. There's so many of you, I can't possibly name you all. I never really thought that so many people watched my videos, listened to the podcast, but also valued the content. It was really overwhelming how many people actually sent me messages of support asking me if I was okay. And yeah, it's really fantastic to be live again and contributing to the fantastic community that we have. So thank you for all your messages. They were super supportive and I remember them all for some time. We have all had times when our gaming group might have been reduced due to a range of situations relating to real life. But I was interested when I received an offer to come on the podcast from Chris and Ken, who wanted to chat about their solo adventures. As you can imagine, I quickly got them into a Zoom call for a chat, and you can hear that right now.
All right. Well, my name is Ken Baker. I'm from Michigan. I've been playing games pretty much all my life since I was a young lad. At 8, 9, 10, I was doing wargamings, which was large numbers and minimal figures. It's kind of where the original Dungeons and Dragons came from. And so, of course, it was natural to step right into that. And I've been playing D&D right along, on and off, pretty much my whole life. Early on, did a bunch of little box games, That was a wonderful thing. Spent some time in the Wild West, played some superheroes, all that fun stuff. And then entered more of a economic phase of my life. Got children, family, the whole yards, and played a lot less. And then again, as I got older, the kids grew up, the kids got into gaming, video games really advanced, and that kind of made my life. And then got back to playing the online role-playing games again. Of course, started back with Dungeons and Dragons because that was the easiest things. It was pretty popular then, and we have had a once-a-week game for the last 10 years or so. The table has changed a few times, but it's basically got the same core players. Chris joined us, wow, 5 years ago?
5 years ago? 5 years ago.
Pretty close to that. I primarily stepped in as the dungeon master, the game master role for much of my career. But here at the end, I've really been enjoying being a player. And I've been less willing to jump in and run the whole thing because I want to. And then when Chris joined us, he actually brought the Mythras rule set to us. And that kind of changed it. What I like about
changed things
game is that you can turn what the whole drama of combat was to any instance in the entire game. Anything can be a conflict, can be the same drama. Unfortunately, at our table, only some of us moved in that direction. So right now, we've kind of got a disjointed table. So when you announced that the superheroes, the Destined was coming out, man, we were just really excited about that. We're both old comic book guys, and I was just drooling and waiting. And when it came out, we wanted to play. So the two of us just started playing. And that's what kind of rolled us into the intense solo play.
So, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Chris Harrell. I am also from Michigan, and I go by Mahler7th on the Discord. I started playing first edition in Redbox, back in '89 when, friend's older brother, that kind of thing. And then I actually ended up taking quite a long break through high school and early adult life, but it kind of never left me, And I was looking to get back into it, but I didn't want to play D&D. So I kind of searched about the net, and I wanted good combat and I wanted classless. So that obviously I read Mythras and was like, wow, it was awesome. But like I said, I joined up. I had known Ken previously a long time ago because of our group of friends. But I got back into that game probably 4 or 5 years ago. And then I ran M Space for them. And that's
fantastic.
Actually what M Space and the group is what led us to trying a solo game, because of the character that one of Ken's characters in that campaign ended up, I don't know, what would you say, Ken, not fitting in necessarily with the rest of the party?
Well,
but
had he played it in the natural extension, he probably would have murdered them and stolen the ship and gone about because they were only going to get us killed, in his opinion. So we morphed it more into where I moved him off on his own and brought somebody else in that would fit a little bit better. So we didn't have the internal conflict.
Very enough. I'm dying to know about this character now. His Space.
His character was an Atreus Spectre, and really kind of a tech programming hacker. But Ken started really kind of getting into the economic parts of the game. Like, what was it? You wanted to take over the wine industry.
Right, in an entire sector of space, because of an early encounter I had where these guys, I was on a planet that did a lot of wine, and they basically kicked everybody off, and it's a pretty nasty thing. So I decided I was going to get back at them and basically my goal was to get so big that I could leverage and take over their entire planet and do the same to them, but economically as opposed to physically.
Got you. Yeah.
So in running this game, like we were both very interested in like kind of continuing this story. So, and this was taking place kind of when COVID started. So Ken was work from home. I'm in like the restaurant and liquor store business. So that was like all out of whack. But anyway, had more free time, you know. So we just found, you know, during afternoon on Wednesday, if we had a couple hours, let's play Atreus Spectre.
Nice.
We just did, you know, him solo kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we just really enjoyed that part of it, you know?
Do you think that's that happens a lot in the sense that a character is more, they're more into perhaps the political side of things, the economical side of things, and that's what players like to do? Do you think that's why people sometimes want to go solo and play by themselves?
I would think so, because when you're playing solo, you can investigate and take deep dives into a lot of things that you're not going to be able to do as a group, you know. In the instance with Atreus Spectre, his character in our M Space thing, like it was all about wine and hacking and making economic moves and, you know, that kind of thing, which at our table, most of the other players would not be interested in something like that, you know. And at your table, it could be the same thing, you know. But it's, I don't know. It just really starts because maybe you as a game master are interested in one aspect and you have another player who is also interested in taking that, you know, to a different level. So then off you go, you give it a whirl.
I think for me, how it almost like these opportunities appear in our Mythras game is probably via downtime, when people like Bartleby, who's a theist, wants to do some questing for his church in the sense that he wants to improve his standing with them, or Cyrus with his order. And I think that really lends itself for soloing and pursuing personal quests, for want of a better word. So you both mentioned Destined, which of course is a fantastic rule set. So how did the move to Destined happen from M Space?
Well, actually, after we played M Space for a while, we went back to a 5e campaign. So because we've been running different games for periods of time, and then we'll move on to something else. Most of them have been 5e. So the M Space was our first delve into the Mythras rule set. We went back to 5e. Then we came back around. We ended up playing a classic fantasy campaign that Chris ran. And it was at the time that we learned that the Destined was coming out. So basically, I know for me, basically, I played whatever game everybody wanted to play until that one came out. But that's what I was looking forward to playing. And Chris and I talked about it quite a bit. We, gobbled up all the pre-materials. And once it came out, we took about a month to go through it and talk back and forth and start constructing. And then we said, we just got to do this. But it was, only the two of us. So we started from, actually a little bit, two different spots. Chris started, he had gotten his powers at a place and come back, and he had a secret identity and the whole 9 yards, and which was a lot of fun. I've given him a lot of grief with his secret identity, because I feel, and I think part of the solo play, you couldn't do that level of that in a group setting. And then for me, I did more of the creature creation. I had something happen to me and I woke up as something else. And I'm kind of just moving through, trying to figure out what happened to me, finding my place. beating up some bad guys and advancing from there, and even remembering some of the past as we go. So it's been like two different styles of comic books. But it's basically, most comic books are about a single superhero. So we approached it like that. It's a story about that. And then, groupings might happen later on, but it's with the solo play, you can get all those details. How does your personal life impact what you're trying to do as the superhero? Which in any group setting just gets kind of moved to the back of the bus.
Yes, very much so. So do you both play and both GM for each other? Is that how it works? Or do you have separate roles? Tell me about that.
No, we run in 1993 Baltimore, Maryland. Some of that I think is because we're both big fans of the show The Wire. So we have, I don't think we've really divided the city up kind of intentionally, but that's kind of just happened through gameplay organically. So let's see, I think I ran for him first, but we kind of alternate. He'll run for me on this Sunday, I run for him next Sunday, and if we have more time, then we'll throw another game in during the week, because we've really found with doing a game like this, it's very intensive on both sides. You always have to be on, so to speak. As a player, you have no one to rely on except yourself. And that it makes a lot of surprise happen. And then as a GM, you have to obviously be able to react to essentially anything that's going on, because we found in the solo game, and I think Ken would agree with me, that giving the player as much agency as possible is a good thing, because that's kind of when all of the cool stuff happens, And we even have an instance that started with his character that he's had to import when he runs my character.
Nice.
So we get these kind of crossing of both of our games, and then we have to account for that. Sometimes it gets a little messy as things can get, but like Ken makes rolls every time my character travels, because there is a person who is screwing with traffic lights at intersections and causing accidents, and it's really a thing for his character, but because it exists in the world, my character has to deal with it also.
Nice. So go for it, Ken. What do you think?
We ended up integrating a calendar into it using the Foundry software, and then we've actually got 2 instances of the calendar, so we know. I think he's about a week ahead of my character. So major events are kind of tracked between the two, although you got to be a little bit soft, because being a week behind him, I know what's happened to him, but he doesn't know what I'm, so the other way around gets a little tricky. I think we got almost 2.5 weeks off at one point. And we're not opposed to just kind of zipping time back together for convenience at different points as well. But we're trying to be cognizant, if I bring in a storm, well, then during that period, there was a storm. And so we both got to kind of deal with it. And I imagine as the pitch goes up, there'll be more of these events that impact, anybody that's playing in our Baltimore scenario.
Yeah. Could it get to the point that both your heroes are actually dealing with the same villain? Could that actually happen?
We could orchestrate that. The difficulty would be is one of us would have to run the villain. And one of the greatest parts about this game is, as the player and as the person running it, you don't know, as the player, it's so real. You don't know what's around that next corner, what's going to jump out, how much danger you're truly in at any moment in time. when all of a sudden 3 guys with automatic weapons are going to be there and you're in a shooting gallery. So you have to be cognizant of all of that at every moment, even though most of the time you're far superior to anybody that's near you.
Yeah. What level do you play for Destin? Are you
we started at the epic level.
Yeah,
we didn't want to start at streetwise because those feel like, to me, like an enhanced person, but not necessarily a superhero. But we didn't want to start at the top end where we had everything we needed. And I think it worked out well because we have a bunch of stuff, but there's something, it's not completely well-rounded. But in solo play, you have to have all the bases covered, or it gets to be really difficult. You can't have a glass jaw or you're always going to get knocked down by it.
Yeah. Completely. And that's brings me on to my sort of like next question, because as a GM, is there anything that you really have to pay close attention to when you're creating these solo adventures for each other?
Well, yeah, I think you really have to pay attention to obviously the amount of combat you're doing, how many people you are putting your character, the character against. I've always kind of used a rule of like 1.5 times action points, and then kind of look at the skill level to try to set some sort of challenge. But I think too, especially with the Destin rules, I mean, at epic level, the characters are very tough. They have a very large bag of tricks, so you can amp that up a little bit, but it's still Mythras, so a couple bad rolls here and there, and you got a broken arm or a bad leg.
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel like in the solo game, as a GM, you have to be very flexible, because we've never played a solo game which is very like linear, I guess, point to point to point. We are using an entire sandbox when we play this game. So for us, like with my character, I was in my apartment, just kind of I was working on my character's book that he's writing. And Ken tells me there's this kind of big parade of bikers and kind of gang thing going down the main thoroughfare where my apartment is. And I think, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but this was just some sort of fluff, so to speak. This was just a descriptor kind of thing he was throwing out there. So then I decided, it's a big biker gang. Biker gangs are generally pretty gnarly and trying to do something. So off I go following these biker gangs. And I don't think Ken really had anything necessarily prepared or thought up for that, but you just kind of go with the flow. Many times when I run for him, I have no idea what he's going to do or how he's going to attempt to do something. So you got to think on your feet. And I think that goes back to, with this, you run shorter sessions because you're always on, you run both sides. But I've found running games for a solo player to be as equally as enjoyable as playing in.
Yeah. And I can really believe that. And I think one of the reasons I enjoy GMing so much is that flexibility and that need to think on your feet as any, because even if it doesn't matter how much you prepare, I think, for an adventure or a session, players always spring something completely on you that you've never thought about. And I think that's really good. And I love to follow it, so I do like that. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how, I'll let you go, Ken, just how.
In fact, I've always found my best stuff is what I've done in reaction to the players that wasn't prepared. In my entire career as a game master, my most favorable sessions and the ones they have enjoyed the best is where we left whatever was scripted at all behind, and we got on fresh territory that was a reaction to things that they had done. And Destined seems to be, in my progression, almost like the ultimate of that. And with the two of us, you can't, you said going into encounters. There are no encounters in this game. I mean, I can create some personalities and I can make some things happen. This is happening out there, but what he chooses to go to, the missions that he does are missions he designs. There's no quest givers here. There's no mission, go do this for me. Doesn't exist because both of us are hiding from everybody. So, we've had some limited interface with the authorities now because we've been playing a while, and but we're pretty much self-driven. So when Chris is playing, he's really making the encounters. So, I threw out the bikers and he took off and started following. So I said, okay, where are they going and what are they doing? And we use Google Earth for Baltimore, which is just a fantastic tool because you can just start moving around. I spent some time preparing, or I do before each of his sessions, just looking around for interesting topography or something that grabs my attention. And then I make things happen there, but it's where he goes that determines what we do. So often it has nothing to do with anything I've looked at prior to when we start.
Mm. Sounds wonderful. So as a player, when you created your characters for this solo adventure, were there any skills or ideas or concepts that you thought, because this character is going to be part of a solo play, they need to, or they should have? Anything like that?
Perception. And this goes back to your last episode.
Yes.
I think that goes for any game with group or not group. Perception is always an important skill. But I tried to create a character. Mine was actually an actor in his previous life. So he has some musical skills and he has oratory skills, which again work pretty well with. He's a shapeshifter, so it works with his power set. But I have found that there's some things missing when I go off in the woods and I don't have any skills to find my way home. It's a difficult thing. So I think with solo play, I think we're playing in a city, so that wasn't as important. So I but if we were on, an exploratory, solo thing, then you'd have some skills that would be ultimately critical to have, or you couldn't succeed.
I also kind of think too that with a solo game, and this kind of will go back as a player and as a GM too, because it kind of, to me, this kind of goes together. You don't have anybody to rely on in a lot of instances except yourself. So it's good to be broader than more narrow focused, I feel like. So to compensate for that, we go a little higher on the experience roles we give them, because you don't know necessarily what's going to be important, what you're going to be doing. And so you might just want to boost your drive skill a little bit, or your research skill, or this and that. So we're pretty free with experience roles. And as a GM, you could make up NPCs to kind of fill all these holes. But then you're running a menagerie of NPCs to fill all these holes. So it's kind of this balancing act that I think we've found with this. But yeah, as making your character, I feel like you need to be a little bit broader rather than a super tight, narrow focus in some instances, just because the challenges and the things you're going to want to do are going to be, you don't know what's going to be, session to session necessarily.
So you need to give, in a solo thing, you need to give some thought to that before you start, or you end up really behind the curve.
And I can imagine that. And it was really interesting listening to your shape shifter idea, because Chugawugga, who used to play Gulliver the Sorcerer and who's back with us with D&D 5th edition with Spelljammer, he was going to create a character that was an actor, and as he sort of like described scenes, they would become illusions and phantasms and things like that. So that's a really interesting connection. I think that's brilliant. Do you have big allotments then? Are you both sort of like millionaires in the world, or are you both quite poor as your characters?
Ken's character is homeless.
Yeah. Tell us about your character, Chris.
Oh, my character, let's see, he got his powers, excuse me, while he was working on his master's degree in Colombian history. So he was in South America, and he was doing some archaeological and field work, and a big storm happens. He gets separated. He finds his way into, a temple of sorts, and then things happen, and he wakes up in the morning, and my character has like telekinesis, teleportation, inherent armor. Yeah, he's a very interesting character. But in Baltimore, he is like an adjunct South American history professor at Johns Hopkins University. So that is my character's day job. So no, I am, upper lower class, crappy apartment, junky motorcycle to get around on. But no, we aren't playing, any sort of Bruce Wayne situation or anything that yet, But it makes the secret identity part a lot more interesting, because there's so many strings you can pull. And even with Ken being homeless, I saddled Ken with 3 homeless children as his wards for quite a while in game.
I found them. I ran into them at a homeless shelter, and I actually helped out the family. And I made the mistake of giving the parents some money, and they vanished on the kids. And so I went back, and the kids are just living in this homeless cast by themselves. And I went, I'm a hero. I can't let this happen. So I put them in, but I was literally, it dominated 4 months of the game time.
Quite a while.
Till I was managed, because there wasn't any way to get them into the system or anything. And I wasn't, it was just really pretty wild. And then when I did find it out, I found a home for them. I kept expecting those parents to be bad guys, to do something, to drag me into a deeper pit than to actually do something good.
No, that's definitely still a possibility.
I still don't know. I mean, they're living with this, couple, but who knows? Because I'm attached to them now, pretty much going forward. They're one of would be, my vulnerabilities if anyone were to know that.
Exactly. And I love that idea of, I always like these vulnerabilities, because those themselves can lead to story arcs in the future about what's going on and what could possibly go wrong in the future. Do you play face to face or online?
We play on Foundry.
Yeah, right. We're playing exclusively online. COVID kind of changed our lives.
Yeah.
We have not gone back to tabletop play since the pandemic.
Got you.
And we've
Yeah.
kind of found too that with using online gaming, it's easier to play more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been playing virtually, since before the pandemic, but we couldn't play because we've got two of the players in the UK, one in the Netherlands, two more in America, so we can never actually get together, and we have issues with time zones, but we managed to find a slot. And I have to say at this point that we are adopting Destin in a very similar way to your solo adventures, in the sense that if people can't play, we will fall back onto Destin, even if there's two people or one person who can play. As long as I'm available, we'll actually play Destin, because we like that flexibility it has. You could be 3 or 4 people playing, or you could just be one. And that really appeals to us.
Well, and I think too, because Ken and I have discussed grouping up and kind of how we'd handle that. But like in your situation, player A is not there, player B, C, and D go out on a mission. Well, you can still give player A some experience roles if you give that, because they're training or working on this or their own project. So it's an easy way to kind of keep everybody on the same playing field per se. And I think too, Mythras offers a lot of games outside of Destin that would be really good for this, especially Fioricida.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. That's Alex Green, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I've never bought that, but I chatted to
excellent.
Alex. Yeah. It sounded. I love the idea of political intrigue and things like that. So I'll have to put it on my Christmas list. Go for it, Ken.
I do think that the rule set, though, plays into how much and how well you could do solo play.
Right.
With a rule set like Mythras, you can make drama and conflict out of anything. With a rule set such as D&D 5e, you're more limited to that. You're always going to have characters with holes. It's designed for a group.
Yeah.
It's designed in that way that when you start playing one, you have to adapt the game to that one. I've done solo stuff in 5e many times because sometimes there's only 2 people available.
Yeah.
And but you have to adapt the whole game to that. Whereas in this, a well-rounded Mythras character for Destined is doable. But we were just playing a campaign of 5e, and I don't know how you'd march off with a single classic fantasy guy in a world, because without that cooperative, I mean, I don't see how you're going to be successful, again, without adapting the game to the player. But this Destined is built for it. It feels that way to me.
Very much so. So if there's somebody listening in at the moment and thinking, I really like this idea of solo play, there's 2 people who are really up for it. What advice would you give them from running this sort of like campaign for a considerable amount of time? What advice would you give them for starting out?
I think it'd be somewhat similar to kind of any advice you give for running any game. But I think with a solo game, the 2 people running it really need to sit down and hash out what kind of game do we want to play. You always do this in a session 0 anyway, but when you're one-on-one, you can get more into it. I can, as a GM, I will have a much easier time fulfilling what you truly want to do if we sit down, we really discuss it. I think Ken and I have really benefited in doing this by doing tons of cooperative world building, because then everybody's on the same page Yeah, and I would say don't be afraid to do it, because I think we think of this game as always having to be a group of people. Don't be afraid to make the group smaller, because I think Ken would agree with me is that this is probably the most satisfying role-playing experience that either of us has had, is just running solo games.
I have to agree with this. Now, part of it's the genre. I mean, it's a lot of things that have come together, including age. But you need to be prepared starting. You need to understand it's not a Saturday afternoon, I'm going to grab a box and see what happens. It's this is the game we want to play. And both people have to be in tune. You can't have one guy who wants to do exploration and another who wants to have a war. It doesn't work well that way. And when you're doing solo play, it's best to have two people that are capable of being game masters, because the player is creating as much, if not more, of that game than the game master. The game master falls back to being a referee. You give the environment, yes, because you have to have the keys to even start. But once it starts, we found it's all in the player's hands and how they look at it and the things they're looking for, and whether it's the type of construction that they want to hide in or the group of people they're looking to interact with, they're going to keep looking until they find what they want, as long as it's available. So as a game master, you're following that along, but you're trying to throw in that detail. And that's, like you said, cooperative world building. The other aspect is the going back and forth is not necessary. You could have two people where the roles are defined. But if it's going to go back and forth, then you are doing that cooperative world building. So you have to pay attention to what the other guy has built and keep that in your mind. And we're taking copious notes as we play, more so than I ever have before.
Yeah. And those notes are so important because it's bringing the setting and each other's characters to life. The more information, the more background, the more narrative that is created, it really lets everything blossom in that campaign. It's been brilliant talking to you both, and I'm totally inspired to go off and create a solo adventure, probably in Destin, because we're in love with it so much, just as you guys are. So thank you so much for coming along and having a chat on the podcast with us today.
Thank you so much
for having us, Inwils.
Giving us this opportunity. I never thought that I would be on a podcast. So
there you are. I have to say a huge thanks to both Ken and Chris, since their chat was recorded in early December, so they have been waiting so patiently for it to appear on the Mythras Matters podcast. And also remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not just drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I'm always looking for reviews or chats with people, so if you are interested, you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the forums or the Discord. And that's it. Another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Don't forget you can check out all my content by following my YouTube channel and the campaign areas on World Anvil. I really appreciate your support, and do check out the Tapper Talk forums and the Discord. There are some great people there sharing their ideas within the discussions. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in May. Until then, I hope all your opposed roles succeed and provide you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you.